Looks nice. Hello, everybody. I will tell you, I'm not an expert on timing, but I'm pretty sure following Daniel Pink, giving a presentation is bad timing. So I will do my best. And we're going to start so awkward, non-threatening audience participation. I have a question. Please raise your hand if you currently work in a people analytics or people analytics-like function in an organization. Wow, a lot. OK. Now, I want you to raise your hand again if your team has been around for at least 5 years. OK? And now raise your hand if it's been around for at least 10 years. All right, now if you looked around the room while people were raising their hands, so one thing you'll notice is what I noticed, people analytics functions are new. And everyone that I talk to who is a people analyst is forging their own path forward. They're sort of modifying this function to fit the organizations they're in, but there's so much that we have to learn from each other. The point of my talk today is to impart some of the lessons that we learned the hard way at Google, having a people analytics function over the last 10 years, and hopefully you'll pick up something that will prevent you from having to learn through trial and error like we did. But let me start by telling you why we have a people analytics function at Google. Now, the company was founded in 1998, and there's been tremendous growth almost every single year that we've been in existence. And in fact, in the first few years, we were doubling in size every year. And that's not too hard when you're going from 5 to 10. But when you're going from 4,000 to 8,000 in under 12 months, that is hard. Tremendous strain on candidates, tremendous strain on the business and on people who are doing interviewing. And so in 2005, we hired our first analyst. And that person came straight into the staffing organization and was charged with making our staffing function more efficient without losing any of the quality. And so the first really great decision this analyst made was to hire me and a couple of other people to help him out, because you need a team. Just kidding. But we did have a lot of stuff that we could work on at the time. And as we looked at how we were actually hiring people, one thing became abundantly clear. The amount of time that we spent interviewing was tremendous. The average number of interviews per candidate was between 10 and 12, all taking place in one day. Imagine that experience. And if you think about going through your peaks and troughs and your recovery all within the span of being interviewed, tremendous burden on candidates. But the philosophy behind it was this. Every single person who interviewed a candidate was contributing something new and unique to the person who was interviewing the person last. And you get to a certain point where you just feel confident you have enough information to make a decision, yes or no, on hiring a candidate. What we decided to do as one of our first analytical projects is to say, if we look at everybody for whom we've already made a decision, how many interview scores would I actually have to predict whether or not they would end up with a job offer? Pretty straightforward, right? And guess what? Having one interview score is better than having 0 interview scores in making that prediction. 2 is better than 1. 3 is better than 2. And an interesting thing happened. When we got to 4, we could predict with over 90% accuracy whether the candidate was going to end up with a job offer. And every single interview score after that added only marginal utility over the scores before. And so the obvious implication, do not put candidates through 12 interviews. Put them through 4. Now, it took us a while to actually implement it, but when we did, we saved hundreds of thousands of hours of engineers' time, which they could actually spend building products. And now when I describe that scenario to you, it sounds pretty well put together, right? We had a clear research question. We had a clear call to action, and there were clear implications. It looks very well constructed. But for all of us who are doing analytics now, you know that this is pretty much what it looked like the entire time we were doing this analysis. Finding the data, cleaning the data, experimenting with different kinds of analytical techniques, convincing people to pay attention. That's what real analytical work is like. Now, from then to now in 2018, our people analytics function has changed quite a bit. We work on a lot more than just staffing. We have had a series of wins and losses that have taught us lessons. And so I want to impart 4 lessons that we have learned that I wish we had known sooner. So the first of those is that every investment in data infrastructure is a good investment to make. This may not sound like the sexiest topic to talk about in a venue where you're hearing about the latest and greatest research and all that sort of stuff, but this is so important. If you can get this right, you set yourself up to do high-power analytical work. 4 things we learned about setting up the right data infrastructure. The first is that HR tools are generally designed for the front-end user. And so an example of this, think about an applicant tracking system. It's great for recruiters because they can find the candidate they're looking for, they can look at the resume, they can put notes and other recruiters can see it. Those systems are rarely designed with a back-end user in mind. How do we pull all the data across thousands and millions of candidates and do analysis on it? The same is true for how we input HR data. Almost every system is designed for the front-end user. So what we did was worked with our corporate engineers when we built our own products to make sure that our back-end use was accounted for. And we put pressure on our vendors. And if they cannot live up to our expectations that our analysts have, we do not buy their product. The next thing that's so important is security and ethics. Security is obvious. I don't even have to tell you why that's important. Ethics is something that many people analytics team think about too late. What do I mean by ethics? Do your employees know what you're collecting about them? Do they know how you're going to use the data? Every single survey, every single intervention that you do, is there an equivalent of an informed consent? Do you know who has access to your people data? Do you have the practices that allow you to whitelist or blacklist people to access those data? Every single one of those is important, and it is not the responsibility of your privacy team or your legal team to ask those questions and make sure you have standards. It is your responsibility as a people analyst. The third is that one infrastructure is required to house multiple kinds of data. Back in the early days, we had all of our candidate data going one place, our survey data going another, HR data going somewhere else, and I would spend my time with complicated join functions, merging, weird VLOOKUPs in Excel, anything to map data sources together. And we're in a world now where we want to do predictive analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence. Every single one of those techniques require that data is mapped to each other and that you have access. So invest in one infrastructure. And then finally, solving for the long term. We've got this really quirky phrase at Google, and we love to throw it around because it's very googly, scrappy. Scrappy means that you've come up with a solution to a problem and allows you to get your work done, and we embraced scrappiness when it came to our data infrastructure needs. Well, scrappy isn't always great for long term, and I would advise you, no matter how much money, well, obviously there's a limit, it may cost you money, it may cost you time, but think about your organization as being more complex and bigger in 10 years than it is today, and make sure you've got that investment in long-term data infrastructure. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is that we have to answer the questions that really matter. In the first several years of our existence, we answered almost any question that was put to us, and every single analyst on our team had at least 30 or 40 simultaneous projects going on. Because we are a data-driven company, suddenly everybody knew what data we had, and they wanted their piece of it, and we would just churn through it, and it was so crazy, so busy. I think we set the bar a little bit low on what kinds of questions we were answering, which prevented us from having the most impact with our work. So what are good questions? Good questions, in my experience, come from three different areas. The first is from business leaders or the HR business partners that are advising them. When a business leader asks, how can you help me make better decisions for my organization? That is a gold mine for us. That means this is a leader who is not trusting intuition, not just referring to past experience, but is open to being influenced through data. They're very often not requiring an advanced regression. They don't need predictive analytics. They don't need any experiment that takes a year to unfold. Often they just need the basics. How much attrition is my organization facing? Who's about to leave that I should intervene with? I'm about to acquire a new team. How can I do that responsibly? You just ran this employee opinion survey. What does the data tell me about my team, and what should I pay attention to? We now have analysts who work directly with our business leaders to answer these kinds of questions, and it translates into pretty immediate impact. The next source of really good questions actually comes from our HR partners managing each functions. Whether it's staffing, performance management, compensation, every team wants to design and deliver people programs that work, and they're expecting the people analytics team to actually help them do that. Now, when they do, we try to push them towards thinking about their effectiveness or their overall success in 4 ways. We call these the 4 E's. One is effectiveness. Let's just say you run staffing. Effective is, are you actually hiring people who do great work at Google? Efficiency. The example I started out with going from 12 interviewers to 4 is as a gain for efficiency. Experience. Do the people who interact with HR actually get the value that they're looking for, and was it a pleasurable experience? Everything from the open enrollment tool to participating in performance management. And then finally, equitable. Equity is a concern because HR actually holds the key to some of the things that employees value the most. What performance score am I getting? When will I get promoted? How am I getting paid? We need to make sure that all of those decisions are objective and there is no bias. And let me give you an example of a project that we do in this space that I think is very important, and that is working with our compensation team to make sure that we are living up to our compensation philosophy, which is very simply, we pay people based on the job that they're doing and the performance within that job. There should be no room for bias, especially gender bias or racial bias. How can we be sure that we are not perpetuating bias in our own systems when we know in society they're there? The People Analytics team can help with that. So we worked with our compensation team on a pretty simple research statement, which is this. For employees doing similar work, does compensation, sorry, I can't read that, it's so small. For employees doing similar work, does compensation differ between groups after factoring in known inputs? And I know you probably like some definitions, so here they are. Compensation, base pay, bonus, equity, all constitute compensation for a Google employee. The groups that we're talking about here are gender and race and ethnicity in the US. And then known inputs. These are the factors that actually do affect your compensation, like your performance, your location, your tenure. In order to investigate this with our compensation partners, we first identified all Google employees who were working in groups sufficiently large for us to run an analysis. We have just over 70,000 employees at the time of the last analysis. We were able to cover over 63,000 of them in our analysis. We ran an ordinary least squares regression where we could control for the known inputs and then see whether gender and ethnicity explained a significant amount of variance in compensation above and beyond those known inputs. So when we ran the analysis across all of these different job groups, the good news is that for 62,000 plus Googlers, no evidence of gender or racial bias in compensation. However, for 228 Googlers, they were members of gender or ethnic groups that were systematically underpaid relative to other groups within their function. And because we had all the data infrastructure to let us pull this data together quickly, we were able to run the analysis within the compensation window before all decisions were finalized. We were actually able to adjust the pay for these 228 Googlers before the compensation window closed. It cost us around $270,000 US to do. We reran the regression, 0 statistically significant differences between any group and any job function that we analyzed. That is the kind of work that People Analytics does in hand with our HR partners. The last source of amazing questions for People Analytics actually comes from employees themselves. And to understand this set of research projects, put aside everything I just said about different HR functions and about what the business needs, and think about organizations this way. We've got tens, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people coming together into the same space, coordinating their efforts to create something amazing, and we want them to enjoy that experience. What are the things that we know about human beings and social interactions that would optimize that experience? When you think about work that way, or human resources that way, lots of questions pop up. How do we get teams to be effective? How can we get people to hit peak productivity faster? If you're working in 10 different locations, how can we make sure that you're working effectively? How can we understand ourselves and each other in ways that help us work better together? Every single one of these questions is something that we have looked into, or we are currently looking into right now, using a whole host of methods from in-depth qualitative investigation, structured interventions, experimentally delivered, predictive analytics. So it's an endless number of amazing questions that Googlers are providing to us. All right, the third thing that we learned, I'm sorry, this is a lot of learning to do in 15 minutes. But the third thing that we learned is that People Analytics is an ecosystem. Way back in 2006, when I was running my first analysis, I thought that people analytics was that cool analysis that we were doing about interviewers. And then it became the cool analysis that we were doing about managers. That was what I thought people analytics was about. And then I started to learn about my colleagues who were doing analytical work in other parts of HR, and we all were actually, whether we knew it or not, feeding into each other's work. And this is what our ecosystem of analysts at Google looks like today. What we've done is identified each of those teams that is doing analytics type work. We pulled them all together, and so today when we say people analytics at Google, it is not just one team doing social science research. It is our business intelligence group, which is creating our data infrastructure. It is our folks who are partnering with the business to deliver insights. I have two teams here, Voice and the People Innovation Lab. These are the teams that are doing a lot of the social science heavy work. And then we have those that are working with our people operations partners on the efficiency, effectiveness, experience, and equity of their programs. That is the ecosystem. So the people analytics group that we have at Google today is more people as a result. We have more impact as a result. We get to work on a larger number of projects, and yet we are still beset with a set of challenges that existed from day one that we created our people analytics team. And as I was thinking about those challenges, one of the lessons that I think we can pull from that is that the solution to many of them is actually through partnerships that exist outside of our own team. Here are the three big challenges that I see us face every single day. Number one, we don't actually own any HR programs. We're the analysts, we're deriving insight. We're asking people then to take that insight and change their programs, their behaviors, and their practices. In order for them to do that, they have to trust us. And so developing strong partnerships with our HR specialists is imperative, or nobody does anything that we advise them to do. The next thing is that we talk don't pretty always, and so it's very important that we have communications experts that translate the things that we say into things that people understand. Our best friends are our communications partners. They are translating analytical work into messages that help business leaders make good decisions and HR folks change their practices, and they're delivering that message at the right time and in the right way. And then finally, our work crosses organizational boundaries. There are two things that make that possible. One is working with HR business partners who are the sort of the natural amalgamation point across HR, but also having a direct line into the head of HR and the management team. In that way, we can actually introduce projects that cut across the world. And so if I were to leave you with one word to remember from this presentation today, it would be the word ecosystem. The ecosystem of analysts that might be doing work similar to yours that you don't even know about yet, the partners that bring our work to life, and then I would also say every single person in this room who is doing analytical work could be part of your ecosystem. We may be in different organizations, but I bet there's a lot that we can learn from each other. And I appreciate this chance to tell you a little bit about what we've learned at Google. Thank you.